think for what we Europeans have been doing in the last 3,000 years around the world, we should be apologizing for the next 3,000 years.
Now, it's going to take a lot of football and a lot of great goals and a lot of great moments to try and forget those kind of numbers.
Like, you're not being paid by Qatar, you're not being paid to propagate on behalf of the state. You're there to go on the ground and do your job and to tell the story of this World Cup, whatever that story may be.
Hello and welcome to the Indo World Cup on day one of the World Cup in Qatar in 2022. My name's Aidan O'Hara, and while our man on the ground is going to be in situ for the month, Daniel McDonnell is going via Malta first, because the other game today is Ireland versus Malta at 7 o'clock, which will follow Qatar versus Ecuador at 4 o'clock. Dan, how's all in Malta?
Well, it's the game everyone in the football world is talking about, Aidan, as we know. I suppose there is like a bit of symbolism, like in the sense that didn't Ireland qualify for Italia 90, their first World Cup appearance, by virtue of a win on Malta? Wasn't there like a famous story of loads of fans missed the game or arrived late for the game because there was some issue with the travel because there's so many thousands of Irish people here? I must admit, coming into land last night, Friday, I was thinking about that, and how we are now in this sort of weird, UEFA demand that nations need to play a certain amount of friendlies as per the rights of their TV deal, which is why countries don't necessarily need to play these games, don't necessarily want to play all of these games, but they sort of have to. And you have this weird scenario where Malta are playing Ireland here on the day the World Cup kicks off. And it's surreal in its own way. Although, of course, the World Cup wasn't meant to kick off until Monday, but that's probably a different story.
Well, that was a late change of mind, and we've had a few of them. We'll get into the other change of minds that's gone on in Qatar. But just briefly, in Malta, what's the mood like, after the disappointment of the result against Norway?
Yeah, like it's a strange one, really. Like, after every Ireland game, there's probably an extreme of some kind of reaction, and you can see some people after Thursday again getting energized and talking about sort of, this game in Malta being a massively pressurized one, but I don't know. I've spoken to a lot of people and even ex-players and people since even around the game and after the game, and I saw someone like Ian Hart obviously kicking off about it over on social media. You chat to others who are more like, this is just a friendly window. It's serving time. It's yes, it wasn't great on Thursday, but not to lose the plot over it. But what Stephen Kenny basically has admitted is that, listen, what happens in Malta is no relevance to play in France in March. But you take a game rather than play none. One game is better than nothing. You might get something from it, but we're not going to be talking about this game and whatever way it goes. But particularly for even a stirring win, you're not like, well, there we go, like bring on the French. I don't think that's going to be the line.
It's certainly there's an after the Lord Mayor show feeling about when it's at 7 o'clock Irish time kickoff, and obviously the real big event of the day is the 4 o'clock kickoff with Qatar and Ecuador. Obviously, it's been overshadowed to a great extent by the FIFA president's comments, Gianni Infantino. I heard someone saying putting the infant in Infantino with some of the Father Ted style comments that he had in his press conference. We'll just hear a little bit about what he had to say, and we'll discuss after that.
Today I feel Qatari. Today I feel Arab. Today I feel African. Today I feel gay. Today I feel disabled. Today I feel a migrant worker. Of course, I'm not Qatari, I'm not Arab, I'm not African, I'm not gay, I'm not disabled, I'm not really a migrant worker. But I feel like them because I know what it means to be discriminated, to be bullied as a foreigner in a foreign country, as a child at school. I was bullied because I had red hair and I had these red, how do you call them?
Freckles.
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 Sorry?
Freckles.
Freckles. You see, I don't even know the term. We are told many, many lessons from some Europeans, from the Western world. I'm European. Actually, I am European. Not just I feel European. I think for what we Europeans have been doing in the last 3,000 years around the world, we should be apologizing for the next 3,000 years before starting to give moral lessons to people.
So Dan, I mean, again, like all of these things, it was the Father Ted moment, and now on to liars kind of thing. But like, obviously, there's so much talk going on about the sports washing element and the discomfort people feel around the tournament itself. I think he's just really just added to all that again with this kind of, just such a falseness about it. It's something we mentioned in the previous show, that falseness about the whole tournament, and it's just very, very difficult to take anything he says seriously.
Yeah, I mean, like in one hand, it's Father Ted, but on the other, there's a sort of a David Brent aspect to it. You know what I mean? In the sense of like, I'm going to deliver this pep talk and this speech here, and this is going to turn the room. This will get everyone going. This is the one that'll work, and then, it's like that episode where Brent sort of opens the door and tells people to get out, and then the cleaner starts to come in. Like it's just sort of it's sort of tragicomedy stuff. But again, like it's one of those where it's such a lame speech. It's so sort of pathetic in parts. I too was bullied. It's with my red hair, and my freckles. That's almost a sense of I don't know. That's almost there's sort of a revealing character insight there as well, and it's almost great humor for everyone. Like it's a great social media hit to almost like everyone having a bit of a laugh at his expense, and isn't it pathetic? And look at the state of him, and we can compare him to various sort of characters that you would ridicule, and yet he's the most powerful man in world football, earning a couple of million quid a year. Yeah, and he's running unelected again next week.
Yeah, it's as if like in his mind that all the people that he mentioned, I too feel disabled, I too feel gay, I too feel all those different things, as if all the people, all the groups that he mentioned were suddenly going to row in behind him and say, actually, he's one of us, he knows how we feel. No, I mean, it takes an astonishing degree of arrogance to stand up in front of the world's media, say those words and probably believe him. When he speaks, he certainly comes across as the sort of person that, whatever he says, he 100% believes, despite any available evidence to the contrary. Yeah,
and like Infantino, like in some ways, his rise, like he's almost like a sort of a footballing civil servant in some ways. He sort of climbed up in the background. He had that. I mean, a lot of people would have watched FIFA Uncovered, I would say.
Yeah.
The Netflix documentary, the 4-part documentary, and I know that one of the criticisms of it was one of the contributors. I think it might be a Kenyan contributor, a sports agent, certainly an African contributor in the fourth show, who went on social media afterwards and said that they felt that actually their comments were heavily edited, that he was very critical of Infantino. I mean, Infantino almost appears in the documentary in a lot of ways as well. Yes, this what a rabble this place was. Look what I inherited. And while there is some criticism of him contained within it, and some sort of editing to reflect some doubts around them, the ultimate conclusion seems to be hinting towards, Blatter and FIFA. The worst of it is in the past, or there's an element of it there. And yet you have this situation next week where Infantino was running unopposed, and sometimes people would say about Infantino that he doesn't expose himself to these situations as much. He doesn't like some of the Blatter press conference
Comments,
stuff.
the tighter shorts. There was always sound bites you could put to Blatter to criticise him. It was women should wear tighter shorts, and
Yeah,
they wanted to be a 33rd team and all that. And as you said, like Infantino, other than today, it's difficult to remember him coming out with something that could be packaged down into a clip and held against him forevermore.
yeah, like there would be certainly like sports reporters on that beat who would be very critical of policy, and there have been comments he's made along the way, but just not something like this, where this is sort of the launch of the tournament, and this is clearly an attempt to hit back, and it sort of backfires miserably. Now, like there were other points within the speech that I've seen some people reasonably say, there was an element of asking, uh, Europe and some of the empires, the traditional empire origin countries to consider their own actions, but that gets lost when you like. This is the thing. This is the era now where the 2-3 minute clip defines everything.
If
Like it
even
stands
that,
above everything
if
else.
even two,
Yeah,
three
and
minutes.
180 characters or whatever, and like it's very hard for him like to shake off that moment. Although I am always conscious talking about this, that again, you can exist in your own echo chamber of it, where you feel horrified by it, and I see most of the commentary is that way inclined. But there is a view as well that like a lot of the anger around Qatar is still restricted to sort of Europe and maybe Australia, and it's not as burning an issue in some other places, where the World Cup story is still football orientated. But I don't know. I mean, like we get closer to the tournament, and we've all been putting out this line. Well, inevitably the focus will turn to the football, and yet again, you had the beer ban on Friday, which is the moving of the goalposts of one of the things the FIFA would have briefed about, to say everything's going to be normal here. And you then have these anecdotal tales of fans checking into facilities, accommodations that are sort of an hour walking distance from the nearest shop. You need a wristband to buy water, and you're just starting to think that maybe some of these scare stories, or things that are described as scare stories, had a fair grain of truth in terms of predicting that this could be difficult. And I'd imagine there'll be retrieval attempts to try and resolve some of these situations that are unfolding, but it all feeds into the whole lastminute.com feel about so many aspects of it.
Yeah. And the other thing is as well, like we see it across regimes throughout the world, not just in sport, across the world, where somebody can stand up and speak like Infantino did, and to a great extent be ridiculed, but as soon as he gets off the stage, the people within his circle are clapping him on the back and saying, great speech, sure, well done, very good. And those people are really the only ones that he needs to appease or please. He doesn't need the Twitter hordes behind him. The people who vote are the ones that matter. And as you said, Dan, he's standing unopposed. So within his own circle, or within the regime that he's running, he's obviously doing something right to be able to just, stand unopposed, whether it's, if it's, there may be some doubts from the outside about it, but he seems perfectly happy, and the people around him seem fairly happy as well. I'm just going to read out some numbers that were in the Guardian last week. You mentioned, some of the reporting on it, and something that Infantino spoke about yesterday around, the trying to ask the Europeans to focus on football. So there's just 3 or 4 numbers here, where we have 3 official number of worker deaths during the World Cup 22 preparations, according to Qataris and Infantino. The next number, 6,500 migrant workers from India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka reported by The Guardian to have died in Qatar between 2010, when it was awarded the tournament, and 2021. The next number, 14 to 18 hours worked a day by migrant workers in Qatar, particularly in the domestic and security sectors, according to Amnesty. 2 more, we have 119 Qatari rating out of 180 countries on the Reporters Without Borders Press Freedom Index, which makes it actually one of the better countries in the region. And then 7 years in prison that men and women who have sexual relations outside marriage can face under 281 article of the Penal Code. HRW says this disproportionately affects women who have been prosecuted if they report rape. It says police often do not believe women who report such violence, instead believing the men who claim it was consensual. Now, it's going to take a lot of football and a lot of great goals and a lot of great moments to try and, forget those kind of numbers, however much Infantino and the like might want people to do.
No, and we've touched on it a bit in our first show. Like, every World Cup has a story that's interlinked with the backdrop to that World Cup, and this is the story right now. And maybe it's the case that, like previous World Cups, and I understand that there's a sort of there's the whataboutery argument that is pushed out by people who feel that Qatar is sort of receiving maybe some almost like disproportionate attention in some way. They'll point, well, what about this tournament? What about that tournament? And what about 1978 and other even more recent
the Olympics
examples.
In 36 going back.
That's gone all the way back. I mean, there definitely wasn't social media in 1936, thankfully. But there's a sense of, or maybe there should have been, but there is a sense of, there's just more awareness of these things now. There's more. There's a greater sort of it lingers heavier on the consciousness, like that previous sort of things that happened, previous breaches of human rights, you didn't necessarily have the pictures, or you didn't have the faces, or you didn't always have the ability to sort of tell the stories in the way that some people are able to do it now. You've seen some great reporting of people going to Nepal, being able to sort of speak on FaceTime and Zoom and various methods of communication with people who were there. Like, in the past, that necessarily wasn't available in as accessible a way. So it's brought the story to the top of the agenda, to the point where my conviction that everyone will just completely forget about it and get thrown into the football. I think every day there's going to be stories unfolded, and everyone will have a choice to make, I suppose, in terms of what they choose to focus on. But I feel like it's always going to be there, running beneath this tournament, or in some cases above it. And like, as I said, the Infantino speech, the absurdity of the Infantino speech is nearly like it's had the opposite effect.
Yeah, it's added fuel to the fire, certainly, where we will be obviously speaking about the issues building up to the World Cup as would any show or newspaper or website or anything like that. But reporting on the Infantino stuff, it just reignites the story for everyone, really. And obviously Qatar and Ecuador, there's no getting around it in terms of how sort of dull the fixture is, and we'll speak about the fixture later on. But just the final thing around the whole build up to it, I mean, what's your own personal feeling about going, and I guess the ethical dilemmas that come with that, I suppose?
Yeah, like, I mean, it's definitely something that you expect and understand, like, those questions. Like, even the Ireland-Norway game last week, like, Stephen Kenny facing questions about going, like Stale Solbakken isn't going, the Norwegian manager. Stephen Kenny's argument will be, to do the job to the best of his ability, to do his job to the best of his ability. You go and watch teams firsthand. It gives you the best chance of seeing them. That's his job. Yet he's someone who would, and has consistently even spoken about these issues, like in a variety of environments. So the question is there. Like, I still always would have the instinct, as a journalist, I think the right thing to do is that if there's contention around a story, to go there and see it for yourself. To go and write firsthand about it. I think anyone who thinks, or anyone maybe who goes there and just goes with the attitude of, I'm just going to write about the football solely and ignore all of that, and you see Fox Sports in America are almost talking about that being the tone of their coverage, I think that's thorough condemnation. But for me, like, South Africa 2010 is my fourth World Cup. 2010, you would have gone and done some stuff around sort of the townships and try to shine light on some issues around there. 2014, remember going into the favelas, doing stuff with an Irish guy working in the charities there. Actually, Martin O'Neill came in with a couple of us for a day to tour and go around it and try and shine light on life there. 2018 in Russia, probably the one where there probably should have been more, really, in some respects. I've referenced that previously, and this one here. Like, I think I still believe that for the reporter's point of view, like, you're not being paid by Qatar. You're not being paid to propagate on behalf of the state. You're not working for a state organ. You're there to go on the ground and do your job and to tell the story of this World Cup, whatever that story may be. So I'm pretty comfortable with that. I think that, to me, is what you should ultimately do. But you have to go there with your eyes open to where you are, and would thoroughly deserve sort of condemnation if you suddenly started to ignore that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be a major issue, obviously, throughout the tournament, as you said. After the break, we'll talk about events on the pitch, as Infantino might like us to do, when we discuss Qatar and Ecuador in the opener of the World Cup. So what do you think as an opening match, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think about the first games of the tournament. Like, I remember South Africa in 2010, their opening match, and I was actually in Cape Town, waiting to watch France later that night because, of course, they were the enemy after Thierry Henry, and we had to sort of follow them around for a while. But I remember the emotion of watching even the South African anthem, and the sort of staff at our hotel, like, almost in tears, when they scored. Was it Shibala who scored the goal? But I'm not
I'll
sure.
I'll take your word for that, Dan.
Yeah, I think it might have been. I think that I might have left out a syllable. But like, that was powerful, and they were the first host nation to ever go out of the World Cup in the group stage. But everyone was sort of behind them. And you think in the Brazil 2014, the Neymar stuff, and the death of Neymar before the semi-final, but there was a sense of the Brazilian story was a big thing. Again, like Russia, you have these feelings that you saw these spontaneous scenes of celebration after they beat Spain on penalties, which was almost out of sync with like normal life in Moscow. I'm not sure if people were necessarily cheering for Russia. There was probably an element of suspicion, maybe even in some ways. But Qatar, I mean, are people going to be watching from around the world and rooting for the home team in the same way that they usually do? Even though a lot of the players, I mean, they've effectively nationalised a large number of their squad. They've found work in Qatar that's preferable to a lot of other people who find work in Qatar because of a certain ability that they have. And it's big moments for all of them. But is it the type of thing that everyone's going to feel a warm glow if Qatar go 1-0 up? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I think obviously it changed in, I think, maybe 2006, perhaps maybe 2002, that it was the host country that opened the tournament as opposed to the previous champions. Like when you go back to certain games, you remember 1990 is obviously very famous for, Argentina losing 1-0 to Cameroon, and, the foul on Claudio Caniggia and all those kind of things. I think, again, in theory, it's a great way to start a tournament with a host nation and get the nation behind them. I think, obviously, on the pitch, Qatar are going to have a huge amount of pressure, probably, less so from expectant fans so much as an expectant government and regime, or whatever phrase you want to put on them. I mean, they've been preparing for this, for 12 years effectively since they were announced as a tournament. They've had, the Aspire Academy, which, reading about it kind of reads like the emerging talent program on steroids kind of thing, where it's just people in there and they're being
careful now.
Well, yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. But careful now. There's more Father Ted references. But, I think they've had an 8-month training camp running into this as well. So, like, certainly, unlike so many of the other teams in this tournament, preparation isn't going to be a problem for Qatar. Shouldn't be, at least.
No, that's the one thing they have going for them, like, in the sense that we've watched them play Ireland twice. Now, I think the time they came to Dublin, they were absolutely wrecked because they were on this sort of mad friendly schedule that they've been on, in fact, for the last couple of years, because the players are effectively controlled by the local FA. They don't, club commitments aren't a factor. They're all based here, so they are the most prepared team in the competition. Like, compared to other teams coming in after a week together. Gary Breen in the paper on Saturday talking about the preparations for World Cup in 2002 and all that entailed. This is like 6 days in a lot of cases, but Qatar is completely different. So you'd imagine they're going to be ready to hit the ground running, and there is still a degree of pressure on them. Ecuador, a lot of people rate them. They're a young side, the sort of the core of a team who've had success at underage level that are sort of starting to break through. And they can probably match Qatar maybe in one attribute that people expect from Qatar is that they're going to be very energetic. Yeah. Even from watching them a bit, they can be sometimes play with a bit of speed on the counter, and they have players that are suited to that. So they have the ability to sort of execute the odd flamboyant moment, but there is still a feeling like as much as they've had some success in their region, and they'll have a bit of the hometown stuff that always helps. The suspicion around the hometown refs and all this stuff.
Yes,
that
careful of yourself as well.
Yeah, the favourable hosting rights that generally are afforded to more so with scheduling really in a lot of cases than other stuff. But still, they got to have their own day because they weren't actually meant to start the competition, but this is their big day. May or may not be anything to do with the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix as well. But I don't know what to expect from the game. Like I'm very much on the fence, and I think I couldn't pretend to have a strong opinion on it.
We're going to ask you to pretend. I think, though, we're going to ask you to have an opinion at least on a scoreline or something. Just for
okay,
we'll pretend. 1-1. I'll go for 2-0 to Ecuador. Just to, I think a lot of certainly the media would like to see the Qatari regime not have something to smile about. I think whether it be you might have sympathy for the players who are involved in this, but I think usually you would say you would want the host to progress, but I'm not sure if that's the case in this tournament.
No, I don't think that demand is going to be there. But they might feel they have half a chance. Mane's out for Senegal, and the group, not losing this game would sort of keep them in it.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us today, Dan. Thanks very much for that. We will be back tomorrow morning where we'll discuss Qatar and Ecuador, and also to see if England can take their first step to ending 56 years of hurt. Thanks for joining us.